You are nothing here, just a goddamn ghost. So do me a favor, take off that pathetic uniform, stay the hell away from the general, and stop embarrassing me." Maline's finger jabbed hard into my chest. Her eyes locked onto me like I was some kind of disease infecting her designer wedding dress. I had taken bullets for my unit, but nothing prepares you for a knife driven straight into your back by the flesh and blood sister you drained your Navy paychecks to feed. But before I tell you about the exact moment the general walked in and crushed her arrogance with his own two hands, hit the like button and subscribe. Comment. I understand if you have ever been bled dry by your own family, because the absolute justice served at the end of this reception is going to satisfy you. My spine hit the oak-paneled wall of the hallway. Hard. It was a heavy hollow thud that rattled the expensive wooden baseboards and echoed down the empty corridor. Survival instinct is a funny thing. Before my conscious brain even processed the physical impact, my body took over. Muscle memory from decades of close-quarters combat training kicked in. My right hand automatically balled into a tight fist. The knuckles turned bone white under the dim hallway lighting. The tendons in my forearm pulled taut-loaded like a coiled spring ready to strike the immediate threat. But I did not swing. I forced my arm down. I pinned it hard against the side of my thigh, driving my own fingernails so deep into my palm that the calloused skin threatened to split open. My jaw locked. I ground my back teeth together until my temples throbbed with a dull rhythmic ache. I swallowed hard, forcing the thick metallic taste of copper down the back of my throat. I looked down. Right below my collarbone, a harsh red line flared angrily on my skin. Her perfectly manicured nail had dragged across my chest, tearing the top layer of skin right above my uniform shirt. It stung. A sharp, localized burn. Something shifted inside my head right then. The heavy, suffocating blanket of sisterly obligation burned away in a fraction of a second. My eyes changed. I was no longer an older sister trying to keep the peace at a family event. I was a Navy commander. And I was looking at a hostile target. I locked my vision directly onto Maline. I did not blink. I just stared, taking her apart piece by piece through the lens of tactical assessment. She was breathing way too fast. Shallow, uneven gasps pulling at her ribs. Beads of nervous sweat were breaking through the thick layer of expensive foundation on her forehead. Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the fabric of her tailored silk dress, wrinkling the delicate material she had obsessed over for months. She was panicking. I could smell the cheap, overpowering floral perfume she always bathed in, trying desperately to mask her own insecurities. She was terrified. Not of me hitting her, but of the optics. She was terrified that General Douglas Mercer, her soon-to-be father-in-law, would walk around that corner. She was terrified he would see me ask what I was doing, standing in the shadows, and shatter the fake aristocratic pedigree she had spent the last year building. The woman standing 2 feet away from me was not family. She was a fraud. A cornered grifter trembling under the crushing weight of her own lies. She stood there, her chest heaving, waiting for the retaliation. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to slap her face. She needed me to lose my temper so she could burst into tears, run back to the wedding party, and play the ultimate victim. That was her entire survival strategy. Weaponized weakness. Force the strong to bleed, then cry when they fight back. I refused to give her the ammunition. I straightened my posture. I rolled my shoulders back, snapping my spine into perfect, rigid alignment. I reached up and calmly brushed a speck of dust off my shirt right over the bleeding scratch. I looked right through her, treating her like empty space. Copy that. 2 words. Flat, cold. Devoid of a single drop of human emotion. I let the words hit the marble floor of that freezing hallway like spent brass casings. Maline flinched. A full-body shudder ripped through her shoulders. My absolute, unbreakable silence was more violent than any physical punch I could have thrown. It offered her nothing to react to, nothing to manipulate. She took a step back, her eyes wide with sudden realization. Then she spun around. The sharp, frantic clicking of her heels echoed rapidly against the wood panels as she sprinted away, fleeing back toward the safety of the VIP bridal suite. I did not watch her go. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, stepping into a dimly lit alcove near the service elevators. The yellow service lights cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. Inside the pocket of my slacks, my phone vibrated. A single dry buzz. I pulled it out. The harsh glare of the lock screen illuminated the dark alcove, cutting through the shadows. Bank of America, transaction approved. $3,500. Aspen Mountain Resort. The final payment for her bachelorette party. The one she begged me to cover last week because her credit cards were maxed out and she needed to impress the Mercer family. My chest seized up. Real physical nausea rolled through my stomach. I was personally funding the parasite that just tried to peel the skin off my bones. I was trading hazard pay for her luxury champagne. I stared at the glaring white screen. My thumb hovered over the cracked glass in the top right corner. The rough, jagged edge of the broken screen scraped against my calloused skin. That crack. It happened 3 years ago. The physical sensation ripped me out of that quiet, expensive hotel and dragged me straight back to the mud, the rain, and the deafening roar of a Category 4 typhoon in Mindanao. My thumb traced the jagged crack on the glass screen. That broken corner. It happened 3 years ago. The physical sensation ripped me right out of that quiet, expensive hotel hallway. It dragged me straight back into the mud. Mindanao. A forward operating base getting hammered by a Category 4 typhoon. Rain lashed against the corrugated steel roof of the command tent like continuous machine gun fire. The air inside the bunker smelled of diesel exhaust, wet earth, and raw ozone. I stood bent over a folding tactical table, my body weighed down by a soaked Kevlar vest that felt like a chest plate of solid lead. My left hand gripped a radio handset coordinating a medevac chopper through a blinding wall of water. Mud was packed deep under my fingernails, dried and caked into the skin. My combat boots were sinking into an inch of standing dirty water. My personal phone vibrated. It rattled against a stack of laminated tactical maps. I glanced down at the glaring screen. A text message from Malene. The landlord is changing the locks tomorrow. I need $2,000. Right now. No. Hello? No. Are you safe? No consideration that I was standing in a combat zone where the wind was literally tearing massive trees out by their roots. She did not care if I lived or died on that island. She just needed her personal ATM to spit out the cash to save her from her own financial disaster. Outside the tent, the heavy rhythmic thud of rotor blades began to chew through the storm. The medevac was touching down. The radio squawked through the static. A severe casualty was incoming. A young Marine with a traumatic head wound. I had less than 3 minutes before I had to sprint out into the blinding rain and help drag a stretcher through the mud. I picked up the phone. My hazard pay had cleared the bank exactly 24 hours ago. Hazard pay. The United States Navy pays you a little extra money because there is a very high statistical probability that you will be shipped home in a flag-draped aluminum transfer case. That is literal blood money. I used my muddy, freezing thumb to unlock the screen. I opened the banking app. I typed in the routing numbers while the wind howled outside. I hit send. $2,000 of my hazard pay transferred instantly across the globe to keep her from getting evicted because she refused to hold down a minimum wage job. 2 minutes later, as I grabbed my helmet, the screen lit up. Received. That was it. One word. No thank you. No promise to pay it back. I threw the phone into my waterproof duffel bag, yanked the zipper shut, and ran out into the screaming typhoon. The memory violently shifted. The roaring storm faded into the suffocating quiet hum of central air conditioning. Thanksgiving dinner 1 year later. The dining room smelled of roasted turkey, warm butter, and expensive wine, but the air in that room was so thick you could choke on it. I sat across the polished mahogany table from Malene. I asked her a simple, polite question. I asked if she had any luck with the corporate job interviews I had spent 3 hours helping her set up the week before. She glared at me like I had just insulted her. She dropped her heavy silver fork onto her expensive china plate. A sharp, loud clink that made everyone at the table freeze. My mother immediately reached out her hands, fluttering over the tablecloth like nervous birds. She did not correct Malene's disrespect. She turned her panicked eyes to me. "Olivia, please," my mother whispered, keeping her voice low to protect the fragile suburban peace. "You are strong. You have your military career. You can handle the real world. Malene is sensitive. She needs family support right now. Do not push her. Just let it go. I looked at my father. He sat at the head of the table cutting his meat. He took a long, slow pull from his bottle of Coors Light. He stared directly at the blank drywall above my head, completely refusing to make eye contact with me. That was the exact moment I understood the system. The family dynamic was a rigged game. They used my independence as a weapon against me. They took my strength, my discipline, and turned it into a permanent bulletproof shield for her absolute laziness. Because I could survive the storm, they decided I was obligated to stand out in the freezing rain while they sat inside dry and comfortable. They sacrificed my financial future, my hazard pay, and my peace of mind just to keep the house quiet. The sharp memory receded. I was back in the dim, quiet alcove of the Aspen Resort. The yellow service lights cast long, distorted shadows across the polished marble floor. I clicked the cracked screen of my phone off. I shoved it deep into the pocket of my slacks. Those old banking receipts taught me an expensive, brutal lesson. You cannot buy respect from people who only see you as a survival resource. I stepped out of the shadows and walked down the long carpeted hall toward my hotel suite. It was time to get ready for the rehearsal dinner, Milline's grand debut before the wedding. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and walked inside. The room was dark, but I did not reach for the light switch. I walked straight to the closet. I unzipped the black canvas garment bag hanging on the rack. The zipper teeth made a sharp ripping sound in the quiet room. I reached inside and pulled out the heavy wool fabric, my Navy service dress blue uniform. The dark navy wool was immaculate. The gold brass buttons caught the faint street light bleeding through the window curtains. I ran my fingers over the stiff collar, feeling the coarse texture of the fabric. I was going to wear it tonight. Not to show off, not to cause a scene or steal her spotlight. I was going to wear it because I needed the armor. I needed the heavy physical weight of that uniform on my shoulders. I needed the ribbons on the chest to remind myself exactly who I was, what I had survived, and what I had earned. I pulled the jacket off the hanger. I slipped my arms into the sleeves. The heavy fabric settled over my shoulders, instantly locking my spine into a perfect, rigid military posture. I looked at my silhouette in the dark glass of the window. The invisible bleeding sister was gone. The commander was ready to breach the room. I stood perfectly still in front of the full-length mirror of the dimly lit hotel room. The thick, dark wool of my service dress blue uniform felt like a familiar suit of armor. I ran my calloused hands down the sleeves, checking the sharp, aggressive creases running down the fabric. Everything was immaculate. I picked up my ribbon rack from the wooden dresser. My thumbs pressed the heavy brass pins firmly through the thick material over my left breast pocket. The sheer weight of the metal pulled the fabric down just a fraction of an inch against my chest. I looked at the colorful rows of campaign ribbons. Every single bar on that rack represented a piece of my life. A hostile deployment, a Category 4 typhoon, a firefight in a region most Americans could not point to on a map. You do not wear this uniform to a civilian event to show off. You wear it as an unspoken language. General Douglas Mercer, the father of the groom, was a 3-star Army commander. Walking into his family's rehearsal dinner wearing my dress blues was the highest sign of respect I could possibly offer. It was one veteran silently acknowledging another. The heavy wooden door of my hotel room slammed open against the drywall. No knock, no warning. Milene marched into the room, her high heels stabbing the carpet. Her eyes immediately locked onto the gold brass buttons and the bright ribbons on my chest. Her pupils shrank. The fake, joyful bride persona vanished, replaced by a tight, ugly knot of pure, unadulterated insecurity. "Take that off," she hissed. She closed the distance between us in 3 long, frantic strides and reached out her manicured claws, hooking aggressively toward the ribbons on my chest. My reaction was pure muscle memory. I shifted my weight to my back foot, pivoted my torso, and caught her wrist in midair. I clamped my fingers around her thin forearm just hard enough to freeze her completely in place. "This is a sign of respect for General Mercer," I said. My voice was dead calm, dropping an octave lower than normal. Milene yanked her arm back, rubbing her wrist, her chest heaving. "You just want to steal the spotlight? You want to ruin my rehearsal dinner by parading around in your killer outfit so his rich family asks about your stupid, violent job. You are trying to make me look small. Take it off. Wear a normal dress right now." She hurled a plastic garment bag onto the hotel bed. It slid across the comforter, revealing a cheap navy blue synthetic silk dress. It was completely wrinkled, crushed from being stuffed in a suitcase, and clearly 2 sizes too small. The thin fabric caught the light like a cheap trash bag. I looked at the nylon dress lying on the mattress. Then I looked at the panicked, manic expression on my sister's face. A commanding officer knows exactly which battle is worth bleeding for. Fighting a delusional, screaming bride in a hotel room 30 minutes before a formal family event was a massive tactical error. If I pushed back, she would scream until hotel security arrived. I did not retreat out of fear. I sheathed my sword. I turned my back to her. I unbuttoned the dark wool jacket. I carefully unpinned my ribbon rack, pulling the brass backings off one by one. I placed the medals inside a small velvet box. The heavy metal clinked sharply against the hard plastic interior. The sound was hollow and bitter in the quiet room. I folded the uniform jacket with extreme methodical precision, making sure the creases aligned perfectly before setting it gently on the chair. I pulled the cheap navy dress over my head. The synthetic fabric instantly clung to my skin with static electricity. It restricted my shoulders. It scratched violently against the red, swollen scratch mark she had left on my collarbone earlier that afternoon. The physical suffocation of the cheap material was the absolute perfect reflection of the mental degradation she was forcing onto me. The rehearsal dinner was held in the lower ballroom of the country club. Milene had orchestrated the seating chart with the cold, calculating precision of an assassin. I was not placed with the family. I was not seated with the bridal party. I was assigned to table 14, the absolute worst seat in the entire building. My chair was shoved directly against the back wall, sitting right next to the swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. Every 3 minutes, the heavy doors banged open the hinges, screaming as waiters rushed past. Every time they opened, they blew the smell of industrial dish soap, burnt garlic, and stale grease directly over my dinner plate. I sat there with my back perfectly straight, my hands folded together in my lap, observing the room from the shadows. A man in a tailored gray suit walked past the table and paused. It was Evan's cousin, a corporate lawyer from Chicago. He stopped, holding a heavy crystal glass of bourbon, and offered a polite, confused smile. "I do not think we have met. I am Greg." "What do you do for a living, Olivia?" I opened my mouth to answer. I was going to tell him I coordinated logistics for the Pacific Fleet. Before I could push a single syllable through my teeth, Milene materialized out of the thick crowd. She slid between us, placing her hand firmly on Greg's arm, projecting a loud, shrill, fake laugh that grated against my eardrums like sandpaper. "Oh, Olivia just works in a warehouse," Milene said, waving her free hand in the air like she was swatting away a pesky, annoying fly. "She just moves heavy boxes around and checks inventory lists. A glorified clerk, really. Nothing important." Greg nodded slowly, the polite interest instantly evaporating from his eyes. "Oh, that sounds nice. Hard work." He took a sip of his bourbon, turned around, and walked back toward the open bar to find someone more important to talk to. Milene shot me one final triumphant glare. She had successfully erased me. She turned on her heel and disappeared back into the loud crowd of fake elites. I sat perfectly still. The loud noise of the ballroom suddenly faded into a dull underwater hum in my ears. My throat burned with the thick metallic taste of swallowed pride. 30 years of commanding warships on the open ocean. 30 years of leading thousands of sailors through the absolute worst conditions on Earth, reduced to a glorified forklift driver in less than 10 seconds. I looked down at the cheap, scratchy fabric pulling uncomfortably tight across my knees. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thick, heavy, and entirely unbreathable. I pushed my chair back against the wall. The metal legs scraped harshly against the concrete floor. I needed to get out. I reached into my purse, wrapping my calloused fingers tightly around my encrypted military phone. It was time to step out into the freezing air and make a call to someone who actually knew what my rank meant. I pushed my shoulder against the heavy glass door and stepped out onto the terrace. The heavy bass of the ballroom music instantly cut off as the door clicked shut behind me. The biting Colorado night wind slammed into my chest. It sliced right through the cheap nylon fabric of the blue dress, raising goosebumps along my arms. I did not shiver. I welcomed the freezing temperature. It was a sharp, clean contrast to the suffocating, grease-scented air inside that country club. I set my glass of club soda down on the concrete ledge. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass. I pulled the heavy rubber-encased military phone from my purse. I unlocked the screen and hit the speed dial for the encrypted line. It rang twice. A sharp click broke the line. Reyes. A deep, gravelly voice answered. I could hear the faint rustle of thick paper files being turned in the background. Captain Adriana Reyes, my commanding officer. A woman who had spent 35 years breaking through the concrete ceiling of the United States Navy. She did not deal in feelings. She dealt in facts. Captain, it is Foster. I need a tactical assessment, I said. My voice was completely flat, stripped of any emotion. Go ahead, Commander. I gave her the situation report. I did not complain. I did not cry. I laid out the raw data just like I would report a hostile engagement on the open ocean. I told her about the forced wardrobe change. I told her about the scratches on my chest. I told her about being assigned to the table by the kitchen doors. Finally, I told her about the warehouse clerk comment and how I swallowed my own words just to keep my mother and father from looking uncomfortable in front of the groom's wealthy family. The line went completely dead for 4 seconds. I thought the secure connection had dropped. Then a loud, violent smack echoed through the speaker. Captain Reyes had just slammed her closed fist onto her wooden desk. Commander Foster, Reyes barked. Her voice was sharp enough to cut steel. Respect is not a ration you have to beg for. You direct thousands of highly trained sailors. You orchestrate the logistics for entire battle fleets. Why in the hell are you letting yourself be used as a floor mat for the pathetic insecurities of a lazy civilian? The words felt like a bucket of ice water thrown directly into my face. I gripped the concrete ledge of the balcony. The rough stone dug into my calloused palms. I am trying to keep the peace, Captain. For my parents, I replied, my voice tight. It is family. You are not keeping the peace. Reyes snapped, completely cutting off my excuse. You are funding a hostage situation. You are enabling a bully to strip the United States Navy of its honor simply because you happen to share the same genetic code. That is unacceptable. I stood there in the freezing wind, staring out into the absolute blackness of the golf course. Listen to me, Olivia, Reyes continued. The anger in her voice dialed back into a cold, clinical precision. She was holding a psychological scalpel, ready to cut the tumor out of my brain. Harmony built on your humiliation is completely fake. Your family does not love you more when you stay quiet. They just find you convenient. You are a human meat shield for her failures. Your tolerance is not noble. It is a massive tactical error. Sharing a bloodline does not grant anyone the security clearance to step on your spine. The heavy fog in my head evaporated. For years, I had been operating under the delusion that if I just gave enough money, absorbed enough insults, and stayed far enough in the shadows, I would eventually earn my place at their table. Captain Reyes just took that delusion and shattered it into a million unrecoverable pieces. My parents did not want a daughter. They wanted a shock absorber. And Malene did not want a sister. She wanted a permanent victim to make her own hollow life look successful. My jaw muscles relaxed. The heavy, crushing weight of daughterly obligations slid off my shoulders and vanished into the cold night air. Copy that, Captain. Message received, I said. Good. Stand your ground, Commander. Reyes out. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone. The wind was still howling across the terrace, but I no longer felt the cold. I turned around and looked through the thick glass of the terrace door. Inside the brightly lit ballroom, the party was in full swing. I located my target immediately. Malene was standing near the center of the room. She was holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, throwing her head back in a highly exaggerated fake laugh for the benefit of her new father-in-law, General Mercer. She looked so triumphant. She actually believed she had won. She believed she had successfully broken me down into a silent, obedient shadow. I reached up and touched the fabric of the cheap dress over my collarbone. I felt the slight sting of the scratch she had left there. Starting right now, the names of my parents and my sister were officially permanently erased from my emergency contact list. The people inside that room were no longer my family. This country club was no longer a wedding venue. It was designated hostile territory. I slid the heavy phone back into my purse. I did not feel the need to march back inside and scream. I did not need to flip a table or cause a scene. A predator does not announce its presence to the prey. A predator finds the high ground, blends into the environment, and waits for the exact perfect moment to strike. I crossed my arms over my chest, planting my feet firmly on the concrete. I watched her through the glass, waiting patiently for the enemy to make her final, fatal mistake. The wedding day arrived with a blinding, cloudless sky. The venue was a private gated estate in the hills. The rental fee for the afternoon was exactly what I made in 12 months of active duty. It smelled like cut grass, expensive catering grease, and desperate money. Meline orchestrated the seating chart like a sniper, picking off targets. I was not placed in the second row. I was not placed on the aisle. I was assigned to row 12. My folding wooden chair was shoved directly behind a massive solid marble pillar. I had zero line of sight to the altar. My existence was completely zeroed out. My parents arrived early. My mother was squeezed into a rented designer gown that visibly pinched her ribs when she breathed. My father kept pulling at the collar of a tuxedo he definitely did not own. They spent the entire hour before the ceremony working the room, kissing up to the VIP guests on the groom's side of the aisle. They walked past my pillar 3 separate times. They looked right through me, not a nod, not a blink, not a single word of acknowledgement to their oldest daughter. I sat there with my hands folded flat on my lap. My spine was perfectly straight against the hard wood of the chair. I followed the unwritten order to the letter. Absolute, complete stealth. 50 minutes later, the ceremony ended. The crowd funneled out of the shaded courtyard and spilled into the manicured rose gardens for the cocktail hour. A string quartet sawed away at their violins in the corner of the lawn. The music was loud, pretentious, and completely unnecessary. Waiters in white gloves circled like sharks carrying silver trays of tiny, overpriced appetizers. I stood backed against a high brick wall, holding a tall, sweating flute of champagne. I did not take a single sip. I used the glass as a prop to keep people away. I leaned against the rough brick and scanned the crowd. I was running a basic tactical reconnaissance sweep of the lawn. I found my target immediately. Meline. She was standing near the center fountain, playing the part of the high society bride. She had a glass in her hand, tilting it at the exact angle she had practiced from bridal magazines. She threw her head back, faking a loud melodic laugh at a joke some rich uncle had just told. But I saw the raw reality underneath the white silk. The back of her expensive dress was glued to her skin. She was sweating straight through the fabric. The tendons in her neck were pulled tight, straining like steel cables. Her left hand was clamped around Evan's bicep. Her knuckles were completely bone white. Her eyes kept darting nervously toward the heavy iron gates at the entrance. She was terrified. She was suffering from massive imposter syndrome, waiting for the heavy hitter to arrive. General Mercer. She knew that the second a real military commander stepped onto that lawn, her fake aristocrat routine was going to be tested. Evan finally managed to pry his arm loose from her death grip. He walked over to the open bar to grab a refill. On his way back, he accidentally bumped into me near the brick wall. He stopped, shifting his weight awkwardly from foot to foot. Olivia. Everything okay over here? He asked. The ice clinked loudly in his scotch glass. Evan was not a bad guy. He was just a useful idiot. He was completely blind to the grifter he had just married. He bought every single tear, every single lie she sold him. Everything is fine, Evan. Congratulations, I said. I kept my tone flat, diplomatic, and completely empty. Give nothing away. He nodded, visibly relieved that he did not have to make small talk with his wife's embarrassing family member. He turned around and hustled back to Meline. He actually believed her lie from the rehearsal dinner. To him, I was just a tired, middle-aged warehouse clerk who counted cargo boxes for a living. I was a blue-collar worker. I did not have the pedigree, the money, or the status to hold his attention for more than 10 seconds. I watched him walk away. I took a slow, deep breath of the cold air. Have you ever been shoved into the corner at a family event just because you did not fit their shiny, fake narrative? If you know exactly how that feels, hit the like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever been the invisible one in your own family. I read every single one, and trust me, the payback that is about to unfold in this garden is for all of us. Then the atmosphere cracked. The cello player in the corner missed a note. A loud, ugly screech of the bow dragging across the thick string. The music abruptly stopped. a sudden suffocating silence rolled over the garden lawn. It was like a giant hand had just clamped down over the throats of 150 guests. The constant annoying clinking of glasses died instantly. The fake laughter evaporated. I looked toward the heavy iron gates. Footsteps. Hard, heavy, and absolutely deliberate. It was the unmistakable sound of military-issue leather Oxfords striking the flagstone walkway. It was a slow, punishing cadence that demanded total submission from the ground it walked on. General Douglas Mercer, United States Army. He walked through the iron gates. 3 silver stars gleamed on the dark shoulders of his dress uniform. The air pressure in the garden physically changed. The fake luxury, the rented dresses, the pretentious violins, it all instantly dissolved under the crushing weight of real, earned authority. He did not need to speak. His presence alone suffocated the room. My heels snapped together. My shoulders pulled back, locking my spine tight. It was a conditioned reflex built into my bones. You do not slouch when a living legend walks onto the battlefield. General Douglas Mercer strode through the manicured garden. The thick crowd of rented suits and expensive silk dresses automatically parted. They scrambled out of his way like a school of small, desperate fish avoiding an apex predator. He was in the middle of a conversation with a local state senator. I could hear snippets of his deep, booming voice cutting through the remaining chatter of the cocktail hour. He was discussing joint military exercises in Germany. The social climbers in the garden immediately leaned forward. They shifted their weight on their expensive shoes, desperate to catch his eye, desperate to absorb a fraction of his 3-star power. I remembered the harsh, frantic order Meline had barked at me in the hotel room just a few hours ago. Take that off. Stay the hell away from the general. Do not embarrass me. I followed the order. I took a slow, deliberate step backward. I pressed my shoulders against the cold brick wall, sliding deeper into the dark shadow of a thick rose bush. I planned to turn around, walk down the narrow service path, and disappear toward the catering kitchen until the reception officially started. I was a ghost. I knew exactly how to vanish. But that single backward step was a massive tactical mistake. In a crowd of 150 people leaning desperately forward, one person moving backward is a glaring anomaly. It breaks the visual pattern. To a man who had spent 40 years scanning hostile environments for out-of-place movements, it was a giant red flag. My movement triggered his observational radar. The general stopped walking. He stopped talking right in the middle of a sentence about armored divisions. The state senator stood there, his mouth hanging open in complete confusion, holding a small plate of untouched appetizers. Mercer did not even look at him. His eyes swept over the glossy, desperate crowd. His gaze cut through the sea of spray tans, fake smiles, and expensive tailoring. His eyes locked directly onto the dark corner of the garden. He locked onto the middle-aged woman, wearing a wrinkled, cheap, synthetic navy dress, hiding in the shadows. The polite, diplomatic smile vanished from his face. It was replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity. Recognition. Complete, absolute recognition. He left the politician standing alone on the grass. He turned his heavy shoulders and started walking directly toward me. The crowd scrambled to clear a path. The heavy, unyielding sound of his military-issue leather Oxfords cracked against the flagstone walkway. 10 steps, 8 steps, 5 steps. The distance closed with terrifying speed. The air pressure in the garden physically dropped. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The annoying constant clinking of champagne glasses died completely. The music had stopped. The silence was heavy and suffocating. You could feel the collective breath of the elite crowd hitch in their throats. I did not break eye contact with the general, but my peripheral vision caught a sudden, violent flinch off to my right. Meline. She was standing 10 yards away near the center stone fountain. She saw his trajectory. She saw exactly where the 3-star general was heading. Her entire body locked up into a state of rigid, terrifying paralysis. The crystal champagne flute in her hand began to shake violently. A heavy splash of expensive liquor spilled over the glass rim and splattered against the flagstone patio, soaking the toe of Evan's polished dress shoe. I could see the thick blue vein throbbing violently against the skin of her neck. Her mouth opened slightly, struggling to pull in oxygen. She understood exactly what was about to happen. Her carefully constructed reality was crashing down around her in real time. Just hours ago, she had charged into my hotel room, screaming at me to take off my uniform. She had called my career a stupid, violent job. She had shoved me into the shadows so I would not ruin her fake aristocratic pedigree. She had told everyone I was a warehouse clerk. Now her feet were bolted to the concrete. She could not run over and intercept him. She could not throw a tantrum and demand he look at her. She was trapped inside her own lie, forced to stand completely still and watch her own execution unfold. Evan stood next to her, looking back and forth between his father and his pale, shaking bride, completely lost in the dark. 4 steps. 3 steps. General Mercer came to a complete halt. He did not extend his hand for a polite civilian handshake. His body transformed. The relaxed posture of a wedding guest evaporated into the crisp, cool evening air. His spine snapped perfectly straight, aligning like the heavy steel barrel of a sniper rifle. His broad shoulders pulled back. His chin tucked into a flawless display of military bearing. It was the highest possible honor. An absolute, undeniable sign of respect, reserved only for those who had bled in the mud. It was the way a commander looks at a fellow soldier who has survived the exact same nightmares. I did not hesitate. I automatically mirrored his stance. I pulled my hands out of my pockets and locked my arms straight down my sides. I squared my shoulders. My heels clicked together against the stone with a sharp, definitive crack. The cheap, itchy fabric of the navy dress no longer mattered. In that exact moment, I was wearing my service dress blue uniform. The heavy silence of the garden was absolute. You could hear the wind rustling the dry leaves of the rose bushes. Every single eye in the country club was burning a hole into the dark corner where I stood. Then his voice boomed across the patio. It was deep, warm, and carried enough raw authority to shatter every single lie Meline had told that day. Commander Foster. The rank hit the air like a detonation. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. The garden went dead quiet. You could hear the ice melting inside the cocktail glasses. 150 of the wealthiest people in the county stopped breathing, their eyes darting between the 3-star general and the woman in the cheap, wrinkled navy dress hiding in the shadows. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I shifted my weight, planting my feet shoulder-width apart. I brought my hands behind my lower back, clasping my right wrist with my left hand. Parade rest. The absolute standard. General, I replied. My voice was calm, projecting clearly through the heavy silence. I do not believe we have met face to face. General Mercer gave a slow, deep nod. He did not lower his voice to a private whisper. He spoke from his chest. He projected his words like he was addressing a battalion on an open tarmac, ensuring every single social climber holding a champagne flute heard exactly what he had to say. Operation Pacific Relief, 3 years ago. Mercer boomed. The name of the operation hung in the cold evening air. You coordinated the entire Navy logistics network to push emergency medical units into the Mindanao meat grinder. He continued, taking another slow step toward me. The Pentagon gave us 2 weeks to get that staging area operational. The mud was 3 feet deep. The local infrastructure was completely wiped off the map by the typhoon. They said it was a logistical nightmare. Impossible. Mercer stopped right in front of me. The sharp, clean smell of his starched uniform and polished leather cut right through the cheap floral perfume drifting off the crowd. You cut the red tape. You bypassed 4 layers of bureaucratic garbage. You dropped the staging time down to exactly 3 days, Mercer said. His eyes were intensely focused, completely ignoring the wedding reception happening around him. Those 3 days of yours, Commander, saved thousands of civilian lives. And frankly, your tactical blueprints secured this 3rd star on my shoulder. Your name is on a very short list of officers I genuinely respect. The words detonated across the manicured lawn. Every single head in the garden snapped toward me. The collective shock was a physical wave. The heavy, invisible label Meline had slapped on my forehead an hour ago, the tired, middle-aged warehouse clerk who moved heavy boxes for a living, was instantly vaporized. It was burned to ash by the highest possible endorsement from a living military legend. I did not smile. I did not puff out my chest. I kept my chin parallel to the ground, maintaining my bearing. I shifted my eyes just a fraction of an inch to the right. Meline was standing near the stone fountain. She looked like a corpse. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her expensive, perfectly applied spray tan looking splotchy and unnatural against her pale skin. Her mouth hung open. She was gasping for air, but her lungs refused to work. The heavy crystal champagne flute finally slipped through her numb, shaking fingers. It hit the flagstone patio with a sharp crack, shattering into dozens of jagged pieces. The expensive liquor splashed over the toes of her white silk shoes. She did not even blink. Her entire fake reality was bleeding out on the stones. She had spent months building this illusion. She had humiliated me in the hotel room. She had shoved me into the dark corner by the kitchen doors. She had desperately tried to bury my 30-year military career under a mountain of cheap lies, just so she could feel taller. And now her own father-in-law had just publicly handed me the crown. She was exposed. Naked. A petty, insecure grifter standing in front of the very elite crowd she had sold her soul to impress. Evan stood right next to her. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, blinking rapidly. He looked at his wife's terrified, bloodless face and then back at me. The slow, painful realization was finally creeping into his brain. He was putting the pieces together. The bride who played the constant victim was a liar. A few yards behind them, my parents were frozen. My mother's hand was clamped tight over her mouth, her rented designer gown suddenly looking incredibly cheap. My father stared directly at the grass, his face burning bright red. The absolute crushing shame of their own complicity pinned them to the ground. They had watched Meline strip my dignity away all afternoon. They had walked past my chair 3 times without making eye contact. Now they were standing in the fallout zone, suffocating on their own cowardice. General Mercer looked around the garden. His sharp eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the shattered glass at Meline's feet, the horrified look on my parents' faces, and finally the cheap, ill-fitting synthetic dress I was wearing. He was a master tactician. He did not need a briefing to understand the hostile dynamics of the battlefield he had just walked into. He looked back at me. A deep, quiet anger flashed in his eyes. I had absolutely no idea Evan was marrying Commander Foster's sister, Mercer said. His voice was lower now, laced with a dangerous protective edge. If I had known your reception here today would have been handled entirely differently. You have my word on that. This was the moment. I could have destroyed her. I could have pointed at Meline, told the general exactly what she called me, and watched him cancel the rest of the wedding out of pure disgust. I could have burned her entire life to the ground with one sentence. I chose the heavier weapon. Total, freezing indifference. I did not gloat. I did not sneer at my sister. I looked the general dead in the eye. It is fine, General. Just doing my job. I said, my voice completely stripped of emotion. And today is not my day. Mercer stared at me for 2 long seconds. He saw the cold calculation. He recognized the discipline it took to hold my fire. He gave me one final slow nod of absolute respect. Understood, Commander. He turned on his heel and walked away, heading straight for the private bar inside the clubhouse. He did not look at Meline. He did not look at Evan. He left them standing in the wreckage. The execution was completely silent, and it was entirely flawless. I unclasped my hands, turned my back on the shattered glass and the pale faces of my family, and walked toward the exit. The engagement was over. It was time to pack my bags. The heavy brass zipper of my canvas duffel bag locked together with a harsh, sharp rip. I hauled the bag off the guest bed and dropped it onto the hardwood floor. It landed with a solid, heavy thud. 7 a.m., the morning after the wedding. I was done. I pulled on my leather jacket, grabbed the nylon strap of the bag, and walked downstairs. The house smelled of stale black coffee and burnt toast. I pushed open the front screen door and stepped out onto the wooden porch. The crisp morning air hit my face, carrying the faint scent of damp pine needles and wet asphalt. My mother was already standing there. She was clutching a ceramic coffee mug with both hands, her knuckles tight. She wore her faded pink bathrobe, but her face wore the exact same rigid, panicked expression she had carried for 30 years. The face of an enabler, desperate to smooth over a war zone. Meline is crying upstairs, my mother started. She did not say good morning. She did not ask how I was doing. Her voice dripped with quiet, heavy accusation. She has been locked in the guest bathroom since they got back from the hotel. She says you ambushed her. You humiliated her on purpose. Why couldn't you just walk away, Olivia? Why did you have to stand there and steal her moment? I stopped walking. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. You have your military pension, my mother whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the upstairs window. You are set for life. You have your rank. Malene has nothing but this new marriage. You know how insecure she gets around Evan's family. You should have just let her have this one day. Before I could even process the absolute toxicity of that statement, heavy footsteps pounded against the wooden stairs inside. The screen door banged violently against the exterior siding. Malene shoved her way out onto the porch. The polished fake society bride from yesterday was completely gone. Her expensive hair extensions were tangled into a messy rat's nest. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks. Her face was flushed, twisted into an ugly, furious mask. She looked exactly like what she was, a cornered, panicked narcissist who had just lost control of her own stage. You need to apologize to me, Malene screamed. Her voice cracked, echoing loudly down the quiet suburban street. You set a trap. You stood right where the general could see you. You have always been so jealous of me. You knew I was marrying into real money, so you used your stupid, violent job to make me look like a fool in front of my new father-in-law. She was hyperventilating, sobbing dry, angry tears. It was a spectacular performance. Attack the victim, reverse the roles, play the martyr. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I set my heavy duffel bag down on the wooden floorboards. Apologize for what? I asked. My voice was completely flat, cold as ice. For refusing to lie. For not pretending to be a useless warehouse clerk so you could feel superior. You ruined my wedding, Malene shrieked, taking a step forward. I paid for your wedding, I fired back. The words hit the cold air like a hammer striking an anvil. I took one step forward, closing the distance. Malene instinctively shrank back. I paid your college tuition when you dropped out. I paid your rent when your landlord threatened to change the locks. I paid $3,500 for your luxury Aspen bachelorette trip just last week, I said. My voice was low, deadly, and driven entirely by hard data. I traded my hazard pay for your champagne, and in 3 years, you have not managed to say thank you a single time. The truth backed her into a corner. And when a parasite is cornered, it shows its teeth. Malene lost whatever fragile filter she had left. Her face contorted, and she screamed the ugliest, most honest thing she had ever said in her entire life. Because you have the money. You do not have a husband. You do not have kids. You do not have a real life. Letting you help me gave you a purpose. You needed me to take your money so you would not be so completely alone. The absolute blood-chilling cruelty of those words hung over the porch. My mother physically recoiled. She gasped, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her coffee mug slipped, spilling hot, dark liquid over her slippers. She stared at her golden child, horrified by the monster she had spent 30 years protecting. I looked at Malene. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, waiting for me to explode. But I felt nothing but a sudden, massive rush of pure, quiet clarity. The fog was gone. The family debt was paid in full. I reached down and grabbed the handle of my duffel bag. The rules of engagement change right now, I said. I looked right through her. I am done funding your delusions. I will never shrink myself down again just so you can feel tall. We are strangers. I turned my back on her and walked down the wooden steps. My heavy combat boots crunched against the gravel driveway. I walked straight to my rental car. You cannot do this, Malene screamed from the porch, panic suddenly replacing the anger in her voice. The realization that her personal ATM was actually walking away was finally hitting her. Olivia, get back here. You cannot cut me off. I popped the trunk. I threw the heavy canvas bag inside and slammed the lid down hard. The loud metallic crash echoed through the neighborhood. I opened the driver's door, slid into the seat, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. I shifted the car into drive and slammed my boot down on the gas pedal. The tires screeched, burning rubber against the asphalt as I pulled out of the driveway. I did not look back. I just looked up at the rearview mirror. I watched the tiny, frantic reflection of a parasite screaming on a porch, getting smaller and smaller until it finally disappeared completely behind a sharp turn in the road. 4 months, 120 days of absolute radio silence. I buried myself in a joint naval exercise out in the Baltic Sea. Cold, gray water, freezing winds cutting across the steel decks of the destroyer. The air out there smelled of heavy diesel exhaust and raw salt. It was harsh, demanding, and exactly what I needed. My personal phone stayed locked inside my metal footlocker. I set up an automated block on my carrier account. Any text, any voicemail, any email from my parents or my sister went straight into a digital incinerator. I did not read a single word. Without me standing there to absorb the impact, the toxic mess back home was finally left to rot on its own. I was standing on the bridge scanning the horizon with a pair of heavy binoculars when Captain Reyes walked up. She handed me a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee. The wind whipped the collar of her jacket against her neck. "You look lighter, Foster," she said, staring out at the freezing water. "Cutting out a tumor is a bloody, ugly process, but it keeps you alive." She was right. The phantom weight was gone. I drank the bitter coffee and watched the gray waves roll. Month 5. We were anchored off the coast of Poland when the secure satellite line rang in my cramped quarters. It was Evan. He sounded completely hollowed out. His voice dragged heavy with exhaustion and total defeat. "Olivia." He started letting out a long, ragged breath that hissed over the static of the connection. "Malene is spiraling." I did not interrupt. I leaned back against the steel bulkhead and let him talk. He told me his father, General Mercer, brought up my name at every single Sunday family dinner. The general talked about my logistics record, he talked about military respect, and Malene could not handle a second of it. She was suffocating under the crushing weight of her own lies. She demanded I pick a side, Evan said. I heard the sharp clink of ice hitting glass. He was drinking hard liquor, and it was only 2 in the afternoon back in the States. "She told me you purposely sabotaged our wedding. She wanted me to cut off my own dad for disrespecting her." He paused, clearing his throat. "But I'm not blind, Olivia. I saw exactly how she treated you. I saw her drop that champagne glass when my dad walked up. I saw her face." He did not ask me to fix it. He did not ask me to wire her money. He just called to apologize for being a useful idiot. He was waking up to the brutal reality of being legally chained to a toxic narcissist. Month 6. A request for a video call popped up on my laptop screen. Malene. I stared at the blinking green icon for a full minute. I evaluated the risk. I reached out and clicked accept. The screen flickered, adjusting to the bandwidth. The woman staring back at me did not look like a high society bride. The perfect ring light setup was gone. The heavy, expensive foundation was missing. She sat under a harsh, cheap fluorescent ceiling bulb in what looked like a spare bedroom. Dark, bruised bags hung heavy under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, greasy knot. She looked completely drained, like a car battery stripped down to 0%. "I started going to therapy," she said. Her voice shook. She swallowed hard, dropping her eyes to her lap. "My doctor gave me a homework assignment. She made me write down every single thing you paid for over the last 10 years. Every rent check, every car repair, the college tuition, the bachelorette party." Malene reached off camera and held up a yellow legal pad. It was filled front and back with blue ink. 2 solid pages of my hazard pay. Then, her voice cracked a harsh, ugly sound, scraping her throat. "She told me to turn to a fresh page. She told me to write down the exact number of times I looked you in the eye and said thank you." Malene dropped the legal pad onto her desk. The heavy thud echoed through the laptop speakers. "I cried for 2 hours in her office, Olivia. The page was completely blank." Real heavy tears rolled down her pale cheeks, dropping onto her laptop keyboard. She was not faking it this time. There was no audience to manipulate. There was no groom to impress. She was trapped in a room with her own ugly reflection. "At the wedding," Malene whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her trembling hand. "When the general walked up to you and you just stood there, I realized your silence was so much louder than my whole fake life. I was terrified of you. You were real. I was just playing dress up, so I had to step on you to feel tall." She surrendered. The arrogant, untouchable shell had completely shattered under the weight of a yellow legal pad. I looked at the broken woman on my screen. I did not smile. I did not feel a sudden, thrilling rush of victory. I just felt tired. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the metal desk. I accept your apology, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any lingering anger. But nothing goes back to the way it was. The bank is permanently closed. The emergency hotline is disconnected. The boundary stays right where it is. I reached for the computer mouse. Take care of yourself, Malene. I did not wait for her to nod. I did not wait for another wave of tears. I clicked the red button. The video feed instantly cut out. The screen went pitch black, leaving me sitting in the quiet, steady hum of the warship. 3 years later. The flight deck of the USS Ronald Reagan. 4.5 acres of gray, non-skid steel floating right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The sky above us was a hard, blinding blue. Not a single cloud. Just the sharp, raw smell of jet fuel, hot hydraulic fluid, and heavy salt water. I stood at the dead center of the formation. The ocean wind whipped across the deck, pulling hard at the collar of my dress white uniform. The official promotion order cracked over the harsh PA system. The static echoed off the fighter jets parked in a tight row behind me. I stepped up to the wooden podium. The pinning ceremony. Navy Captain, 06. In the military hierarchy, this is the altitude where the oxygen gets thin. This is the rank that commands nuclear aircraft carriers. The rank that decides the survival of entire battle groups. The metal pins slid through the thick fabric of my collar. Silver eagles. I stood at attention, locking my knees, feeling the cold, heavy metal press down against my collarbone. Right over the exact spot where a manicured fingernail had ripped my skin open 3 years ago. The physical weight of the rank settled onto my shoulders. It was heavy. It was the weight of 40 years of refusing to bow down, refusing to break, and refusing to fund a lie. I looked down at the rows of folding metal chairs set up on the flight deck. My parents sat in the second row. They were older now. The fake country club arrogance had completely washed out of their faces. They were not looking through me today. They sat up straight, their hands folded quietly in their laps. Their eyes held a quiet, timid reverence. The comfortable blindness they used to hide behind was gone. They were finally forced to look at the massive, undeniable reality of the daughter they had treated like a disposable floor mat. They looked small. General Douglas Mercer sat in the front row. He wore his 3 stars. He caught my eye and gave a slow, solid nod. We were no longer a general and a passing officer. We were peers, strategic partners. And then there was Malene. She stood near the back of the seating area away from the brass. The expensive tailored silk, the heavy spray tan, the fake high society laugh, all of it was gone. She wore a simple dark cotton summer dress, flat shoes. Her hair was pulled back into an ordinary messy ponytail. She was holding a 1-year-old boy on her hip. She looked tired. She looked normal. As the ceremony broke and I walked down the steep metal steps of the podium, she stepped out of the crowd. I braced myself. It was pure muscle memory. But her eyes were clear. There was no frantic insecurity darting around looking for an audience, no hidden daggers, no victim routine. She shifted the heavy weight of her son on her hip and looked me dead in the eye. "You look amazing," Malene said. Her voice was steady, grounded. "I am really proud of you, Olivia." I looked at her face. I did not run a tactical sweep for a trap because there was none left to find. The parasitic, narcissistic shell had starved to death in that empty therapy room, leaving an actual, functioning human being behind. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. The first genuine, unguarded smile I had given her in a decade pulled at the corners of my mouth. A heavy hand clapped down hard on my shoulder blade. Adriana Reyes. She was wearing the thick, heavy gold sleeve stripes of a Navy admiral now. She leaned in close. The ocean wind carried her raspy, gravelly voice right to my ear. "You won a massive war without firing a single bullet, Captain Foster." Reyes muttered, a tough, satisfied smirk cutting across her face. "You saved your own life. And while you were at it, you starved the rot right out of your sister's soul and forced her to rebuild it from the concrete up." I gave a short nod. Absolute unyielding discipline did what 30 years of blind cowardly appeasement could never do. I walked away from the loud crowd. I stepped right up to the very edge of the massive flight deck. The drop to the churning ocean below was 70 feet. The dark water slammed brutally against the steel hull of the carrier, throwing cold white spray high into the air. I stared out at the absolute edge of the horizon, the line where the dark water met the blue sky. I spent 4 decades of my life learning how to defend a nation. I learned how to move fleets, load weapons, and coordinate disaster relief in the most hostile corners of the globe. But it took getting shoved into the dark, greasy corner of a cheap country club kitchen to finally learn how to defend my own dignity. You do not fix toxic people by giving them more of your blood. You do not buy respect with bank transfers. You fix the rot by cutting off the supply line and letting the fake reality collapse on top of them. The greatest revenge is not a screaming match in a driveway. It is not destroying someone else's life. The greatest revenge is standing on a steel deck in the middle of the ocean, living a life so incredibly massive, so perfectly undeniable, that nobody can ever make you invisible again. If you have fought your own battles and built your own peace from the ground up, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below and tell me your story of walking away from the toxicity. Tell me how you stopped funding the lies and built your own empire. I read every single one. Thank you for listening to a soldier.